local tourism, but I leave that up to you to decide whether you want to do that. And here are just a couple of the places we visited yesterday on our tour. You probably know most of them. You don't know that, though. That was opposite the Downtowner. But, you know, there's more to Minneapolis St. Paul's than burgers, I'm sure. Now, just to go a bit into sort of the bigger dynamics, we all know that the economy has moved and changed and has become more service-oriented, knowledge-intensive, and so on. But now people increasingly talk about it's not only a knowledge economy, it has to be a creative economy, because in order to get knowledge, you first need to be open-minded and creative in order to get an invention. It doesn't happen first. It's the precondition is the need to be creative. Now, given that most big cities that you can think of that were on the map that we heard this morning are thinking about that, the question is for you, what is your emerging advantage? What are you going to do, not differently, because I think you need to do that in any case, but that's an interesting challenge for you to consider. And if you take that on board, you have to then really say that this could be a sort of paradigm shift, because it really means the city is operating differently. The industrial city is very different from a knowledge-intensive city. And that puts every place in some way or other at a crossroads about how it puts together the things it needs strategically in terms of economic development, cultural development, and so on. Now, some people feel this is all too much, you know, keep things as they are, we've done it in the tried and tested ways. Other people, by contrast, and I think you're this other group, who say this is all very invigorating. So this is the invigoration group here, I presume, rather than the scary group. But what it means really is you have to drag out some of the preconceptions we've had about how cities work. Now, if we look at a place, and this is me just summarizing in very simplistic terms, that is livable and creative, i.e. gives you opportunities to do things, it has a couple of features. One, it's a place of obviously rootedness in some sense. It's a place of possibility where you feel you can do things, fulfill your ambitions. It's a place where you can connect physically. That may be a bit difficult because, sorry about this, but American cities are a bit, you know, oh my God. Where you can connect in some sort of sense. A place where you can learn and relearn and be switched on, and obviously a place that sometimes inspires you. And I think it's quite interesting to look at your city from that perspective, because we mostly look at the city simply from a technical point of view. You know, what are the roads doing, all of that sort of stuff. Roads are important. I'm not against roads, but a lot of asphalt does give you a feeling of asphalt as endlessness. But, I mean, that's a separate issue, but just think about psychologically what that feels like. So the rootedness thing, you know, acknowledging where one comes from in some sense is incredibly important, I think, because unless you're anchored, you can't, in a sense. If you're well anchored, I've found that people are much more willing to change and open out in general. Because in essence, the city is a place of connection, meeting, trading, talking, discussing, doing things, transacting in one way or another, and then obviously occasionally perhaps playing or whatever else. But that is the heart of the city. The city is, that's why it exists. It's the place where apparently you have more possibilities than you do in the village and so on, where there are more connections, more ideas and so on occurring. And one of the interesting things I feel I want to throw at you when you're doing your developments, is this thing you're doing a city of projects, a place of individual projects, all the things we heard from the mayor, deputy mayor earlier, or is the project the city? Easy to say, difficult to do, completely different mindset. One's very integrated thinking, holistic, connecting things. The other saying, I'm just going to make my profit on this little thing here. I don't care what happens elsewhere. So, some examples of cities trying to be intercultural. Now, I'm going to just show things because I knew that Ramona was talking today, this morning, which are beyond the tourist repertoire that we are aware of. You know, the point, it's exotic, which we don't want all of this to be exotic at all, but restaurants, crafts, shops, festivals, and so on. All of those things are very important, but let's just see whether some of these other things translate into, these examples I'm giving, into an interest in the place and therefore ultimately some form of tourism. Now, one of the first ones, conviviality, which means living together, is Rotterdam. This is a thing which is called meeting on the Maas. Rotterdam has over 50% of people who don't come from Rotterdam. So here people who already live there and others come in, they sit round a table and do a bit of speed dating on their interests. So I happen to know that that guy who's got the long nose there on the left, in fact, is a football fan who's going to take someone from Somalia to a football match. I'm not quite sure what these two ladies ultimately decided to do, but you see what I'm saying? They just decide to do things together which are their joint interests. They don't know each other yet. I think it's quite a good project, just as an example, meeting on the Maas. The Maas is their river. Another example, which let's talk about this later, but it's fantastic, it's called City Safari, where basically about 600 people in Rotterdam have agreed to be visited. You get vouchers and you select, you say, oh, I want to meet, let's say I'm saying, I want to meet an urban planner, I want to meet an imam, I want to meet a so-and-so. They're there, you get the vouchers, you have to find your way there. You have to then find, they obviously have public transport, etc. I'm not saying you haven't got public transport, but the point is you get on the tram and then you, and we did, Susie and I, we did 6 on that day, ending up in an imam's, in a mosque that was in an apartment block and had a meal with an imam. Now, I've never had a meal with an imam in my life. So that's just as an example. It's a fantastic experience, and 6 of those in a day, just any type of person you would wish to have. And the objective is that the person who's visited, who gets some money out of that, they were trying to avoid, this is a form of tourism where they're trying to give the person who you're meeting some resource for being willing to be met and have a conversation with you. So I think City Safari, and the idea of a safari, but a city safari, is an interesting idea. This is Genk, not Ghent, Genk, which is really about cultural confidence, I think. Now here's quite interesting, very industrial city, as you can see, completely transformed, the mines have gone, very poor. But they had in an area where there was a bit of a problem, they had these very vast posters, really bigger than this, yes? And what they were, so this guy is the imam, and we're back to imams, reading the Bible. This is a very Catholic woman reading the Quran, yeah? So they had lots of these posters everywhere. There were about 50 of them. I think it's a very simple project, but a very interesting one. Here's another one of this, you know, football, they're Belgian football champions. And here it's saying, you know, respect begins here, because obviously football crowds, I hate you, I'm a tribal so-and-so, I hate you, and so on. But even doing things like checking that even in sport that we have friendly competition rather than being a hooligan or whatever. So that is all part of a project they have, which is just called Talking. And what they've got is just lots of people talking to each other. And what they're trying to make explicit there is whatever the issues are that are hidden are brought out and are allowed to be discussed publicly, not in a way that I'm embarrassed, you know, because we're obviously often all a bit prejudiced, all a bit embarrassed, all of these things, to try and bring these things out in the open, which I think is a good idea. Another project, this is a youth worker here, was to get people of mixed groups to build this Viking ship. It was called the Viking Project. And this thing was so successful that the Prime Minister of Belgium even came to be able to just do one stroke of the varnish, because it really, the impact on people doing, it's again about doing together, doing this, building this, was so complex, and it involved 50 young kids, who of course are bonded in a completely different way than they would otherwise. Anyway, this is a place none of us have heard about, but quite interesting project happening there. And of course what they're also doing is reusing the coal mines. In this case you can see that this coal mine here is becoming a cultural centre with lots of activities going on at the same time. Here's another project from Saragossa, Spain, which is really about renewal in general. The old town, quite dense, etc., etc. It's got lots of places which are completely ruined. And these places are places where drug dealers hang out and all of that. You can imagine there's just sort of garbage chucked there. So a combination of architects and artists got together and built 12 sites, but they consulted with the communities, which are all very diverse here, about what they wanted. And each of them wanted something completely different. So number 12 there were quite a lot of, funnily enough, Somalis, just like here, all they wanted was to play table tennis, right? So I know you might think this is simple, but it is simple. That's the project, which was cleaning up these whole ruins and then having a table tennis table there. Another one was about gardening, where all the different vegetables and things like that from the different groupings from the various communities are grown there and they're sold there in the farmer's market and so on. Again, a way of the different groups coming together there. You can see the website at the bottom there, Esto non son solar. Anyway, just look up Saragossa and all that. But can you see these numbers? What's quite interesting is the numbers are there, which visually creates a marker, so you have some sort of form of identity and clarity. You would say branding or something, but anyway, when you discover this, it's actually quite exciting. And here, I'm only taking this because this is a hare. He's also number 11. But this hare, can you see that hare at the background there? They painted the hare. That's what the people wanted. But you can already see it's leading to the regeneration of the area, because that next building, which looked like this, has already been regenerated partly because of the hare. So each of these little mini areas is having a regeneration effect around them. I personally think that's a very interesting project.